And yes, so when it got to 200 shops, we were sort of outselling most of the other cartel members.
Yeah.
And getting Depeche Mode direct from Mute, and maybe Joy Division or
Factory,
the New Order at that time from Factory, and sort of putting these into these big chart records into the Our Price chain. And then of course we got squeezed between Rough Trade and Our Price. Our Price, as a chain does, wanted to have a returns facility and insisted that all of their suppliers did that, and then Rough Trade refused to let us have a returns facility for them, and so we were buying from them,
between the
getting the returns. So our returns pile was building up and up, and we.
Well, I suppose that you could almost manage that, but it does have an element of risk that you wouldn't.
We could manage it for a while, but we were trying to turn a blind eye to it, I think, in some ways. And then we got squeezed. We were actually going to form a new wholesale with Rough Trade's wholesale for a while. There was a whole lot of heads of agreement drawn up, but John Knight, who was running the distribution, he sort of just backpedaled on it. He didn't want to do it. Yeah. And so we just sort of sat on it for a year, and then eventually...
What year, roughly, when would that have been?
I think, when did our distribution close down? In 6 perhaps.
Right. So you're left then to concentrate full time on Jungle
Yeah, so John left the company at that time, and after a year then he met up with John Loader from Southern. Yeah. Or knew him for many years, but started SRD with John Loader.
Yes, yeah, which is still going. Which is still, John has gone.
Yeah, it's been very successful.
Yeah. So going back to Jungle, Johnny Thunders early on. What the other sort of? I'm trying to think of the keystone artists that defined the
initial ones.
Early on.
Well, we'd signed Play Dead at Fresh, and then we'd put out the first mini album, First Flower. Was one of our first releases. There was all sorts of the new punk things going on. Yeah. Addicts, UK Subs, Action Pact.
All of which were decent,
put on
decent sellers in their day as well.
Oh yeah.
And that was Fallout. Yeah.
That was we put that on a separate imprint, Fallout, because it seemed to be a bit of a
self-defining genre, isn't it?
Yes, and it was very much people who were saying punk lives on and punk's alive. Whereas,
although those were some of the better acts, there were a lot of acts which weren't of that quality. But I mean, Action Pack were great. UK Subs were hit and miss around that time, but the Addicts were always good.
They did a great Urban Dogs album at the time,
which of course was with Knox. And
that was the first one we did with Charlie Knox and with Charlie and Knox. But yeah, some great things going on.
Yeah. So we're into the sort of with Fallout. I suppose that would have been the peak years. Would have been about the mid '80s, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jungle. I was
trying to think. We were releasing quite a lot on Jungle as well. But I think there was a bit of a rush on the punk side of things because there was a demand there, and it was we had these great bands and on Jungle. Who else was there? There was some bands that said, we're not a punk band. Rubella Ballet, Newtown or Neurotics,
who lived down the road from me. So hello.
Right. So they were on Jungle, as were Peter and the Test Tube Babies. So it was a bit of a
Manufactured Romance as well.
Yeah, they were on Fresh. They were at one of Alex's High Hopes back in the Fresh days.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I've got the discography here. I printed it out. I'm just trying to think of that's the Fresh one. But yeah, apologies, I didn't bring the Jungle one with me. But yeah, in terms of establishing Jungle, I suppose later on in the 80s, if I've got the chronology correct, you start working with some of the artists in terms of their own labels, don't you? I mean,
Well, part of the cartel structure was a lot of people like Red Rhino would, as part of the distribution, yes, we'll press your record and distribute it. It's a pressing and distribution deal, and we'll give you your own label.
Yeah.
How about that? And the other bands would go, oh, that's great, we've got our own label. So we had to do the same for bands. It was never a very satisfactory arrangement, but because the distribution, things would sell quite good quantities back then, so it sometimes worked. But I think bands really need the backing of a label, although they often thought there was nothing to do on the label side.
Was there a sense of vanity publishing with the bands themselves, do you think? That, we've got our own label?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, it's a bit of that. And also, if they'd made their own recording, sometimes that was the situation, then it would be appropriate that they, and some of them, like Conflict, started their own label and went on
More
to
Hate.
More to Hate, and it went on to be a very good label with lots of other releases. So we worked a lot with Conflict over the years.
And you had Mint as well.
Mint was Mercury Rev. That's a bit later on.
Is that Dean Wareham? No.
The first one was Mutton Gun, which was Dave Boyd, who at the time was working for Rough Trade, and then went on to run Hut Records. And
the Virgin subsidiary. Yeah.
And then
Test Department's label.
Yeah, Test Department, and it's sort of partly because we came out of being a distributor. Sometimes people would press their own records and bring them to us to distribute, and sometimes we would do it for them. There was, we just always make the deal to fit.
Yeah. Okay. Just in terms of Jungle, I might have this wrong, but you released less records as the 90s progressed, as far as I observed anyway. I might have got
possibly,
that.
probably,
yes, or maybe I wasn't getting them.
I haven't counted.
But how would you say that the label's identity changed as you moved through the 90s?
I don't take a lot of notice of our identity. I think that's what the perception is from the outside. But I'm sure things changed as you get known for your latest releases.
Well, you did a bit more back catalogue as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
You did some more compilations of various things.
Yeah. One of them series. I mean, going back to starting from the early. Back to the Fresh, it all continues through. One of the guys working there was Phil Langham from the Dark.
Yes. Yeah.
Alex often had bands, and he was in the Dark. Were sort of younger brothers or modelled themselves on Menace. So Charlie had known Phil as a young kid, and he got him the job at Fresh and started the Dark. And then after Fresh finished, he got his job at Cherry Red to run the Anagram label.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember him dragging me down to see his brand new band, Alien Sex Fiend, that he was going to put records out for.
And that was the first night at the Batcave.
The first night at the Batcave, yeah. And he took me to this place, and there was a queue, and we had to spend half an hour, 45 minutes in the queue. And the reason there was a queue was there was a lift, and the lift would only, the club was up on the 4th or 5th floor, and the lift would only take 2 or 3 people in at a time. So it had to go up and down. So you went upstairs, the place was half empty because
of the lift.
You couldn't get up there. Yeah. But gradually it filled up, and they decorated it out, and it was Specimen that ran it, and it was great, and it grew and was a fantastic club. And many a night I spent there, and that had been the whole goth scene. Yeah. Grew out of that, though no one called it that. It was some journalistic
also, there's the
thing.
Fields of the Nephilim connection as well, isn't there?